Thunder roared as the torrential downpour transformed the peaceful creek into a raging monster that devoured everything in its path, including the life Primrose Gibson had known for her 19 years. The floodwaters came without warning in the night, a wall of muddy destruction that tore through the small homestead where she lived with her parents and younger brother on the outskirts of Silver Creek, Arizona Territory, 1878. Primrose awoke to her mother's panicked screams. The cabin floor was already ankle-deep in swirling water when she stumbled from her bed. Her father had thrown open the door, shouting for them all to run for higher ground as the supports of their simple home groaned under the assault of the furious current. "Papa." Primrose called, reaching for her father's hand as they stumbled into the torrential rain. Her mother clutched 12-year-old Thomas to her chest, following closely behind. The ground beneath them gave way without warning. Primrose felt her father's grip torn from hers as the wall of water hit them with the force of a charging bull. She screamed their names as the current dragged her away, her fingers clawing desperately at mud and rocks and roots. The last thing she saw was her mother's pale face disappearing beneath the churning surface, her brother's terrified eyes wide in the flash of lightning. Primrose fought the water with every ounce of strength she possessed, somehow managing to grab onto the exposed roots of an ancient cottonwood. The bark scraped her palms raw as she pulled herself up the embankment, collapsing on slightly higher ground. Her lungs burned, her sodden dress weighing her down like an anchor as she crawled farther from the raging waters. "Mama, Papa, Thomas." Her voice was lost in the roar of the flood and the crash of thunder. No one answered through the night. Primrose huddled beneath the partial shelter of a rock outcropping, shivering uncontrollably as the rain continued to fall. By dawn, the worst of the storm had passed, though the creek remained swollen far beyond its banks. The rising sun revealed a landscape transformed, trees uprooted, boulders moved, and thick mud covering everything. Of her family's cabin, nothing remained but scattered timber and debris. For 3 days, Primrose searched. Her hands bled from digging through mud and wreckage. Her voice grew hoarse from calling. She found her mother's shawl caught in the branches of a fallen tree, her father's pocket watch half buried in silt, but of her family there was no sign. The flood had claimed them, sweeping them away like it had never mattered that they had built a life here, that they had dreams, that they were loved. On the 4th day, her strength finally gave out. Primrose collapsed beside what remained of the creek, now receded to its banks but still running high and fast. Her dress was caked with mud, her copper-red hair a tangled mess, her face streaked with dirt and tears. She had not eaten since before the flood, surviving on creek water that left her stomach cramping. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the hollow ache in her chest. She didn't hear the approach of hooves until they were almost upon her. When she looked up, the sun behind the rider cast him in silhouette, tall and broad-shouldered atop a chestnut stallion. "Miss, are you hurt?" His voice was deep, concerned. As he dismounted and stepped closer, Primrose could see he was young, perhaps in his mid-20s, with dark hair beneath his wide-brimmed hat and eyes the color of a summer storm. "My family," she whispered, her voice cracking. "The water took them." The stranger knelt beside her, and Primrose saw compassion in his gaze. "I'm Isaac Grayson," he said gently. "I've got a ranch about 5 miles north of here. Let me help you." Too exhausted to protest, Primrose allowed Isaac to lift her onto his horse. She swayed in the saddle as he mounted behind her, his strong arms keeping her from falling as darkness crept into the edges of her vision. The last thing she remembered was leaning back against the solid warmth of his chest as consciousness slipped away. Primrose woke to unfamiliar surroundings, a small but comfortable bedroom with sunlight streaming through calico curtains. For one blissful moment, her mind was empty of everything but the softness of the bed beneath her and the clean smell of the quilts tucked around her. Then memory returned with crushing force and a sob tore from her throat. The door opened and a plump, gray-haired woman hurried in, her kind face creased with concern. "There now, child. You're safe. I'm Mrs. Abigail Porter, the housekeeper here at Grayson Ranch, my family," Primrose whispered. "I need to find them." Mrs. Porter's expression softened with sympathy. Mr. Grayson and some of the hands rode out yesterday and the day before that. They've been searching, but she took Primrose's hand, her touch gentle. The creek flooded for miles. They found other victims, but no one matching the description you gave in your fever. Fever? You've been here 3 days, child. The exposure and exhaustion brought on a terrible fever. We weren't sure you'd pull through. 3 days lost. 3 days when she should have been searching. Primrose tried to rise, but dizziness forced her back against the pillows. You need to rest, Mrs. Porter insisted, pressing a cool cloth to Primrose's forehead. Mr. Grayson won't stop looking, I promise you that. He's not a man who gives up easily. As if summoned by his name, a knock sounded at the door and Isaac Grayson entered. Without his hat, Primrose could see his hair was the deep brown of coffee with a slight wave to it. His face was tanned from long days in the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. Miss Gibson, he said, using the name she must have given during her fever. I'm glad to see you awake. Have you found them? Primrose asked, unable to keep the desperate hope from her voice. The look in his eyes gave her the answer before he spoke. I'm sorry. We've searched as far as we could along the creek in both directions. We found remains, but none that matched your family's description. He approached the bed, his steps measured. The flood hit several homesteads. The Wilsons and the Pattersons both lost people too. Fresh tears spilled down Primrose's cheeks. They have to be somewhere. The creek feeds into the Salt River, Isaac explained gently. It's possible they were carried farther than we've been able to search. Then I need to go farther, Primrose insisted, again trying to rise. This time it was Isaac's hand that stopped her, large and calloused but surprisingly gentle on her shoulder. You're in no condition to go anywhere. And even if you were, the terrain is dangerous, especially after the flooding. There are washouts, quicksand, predators drawn to what the water left behind. I can't just abandon them. No one's asking you to, Isaac said firmly. I've sent word to the sheriff in Silver Creek and to the settlements downstream. If anyone finds anything, they'll let us know. But right now, you need to recover your strength. Primrose wanted to argue further, but exhaustion dragged at her like weights. She sank back against the pillows, defeated for the moment. You're welcome to stay here as long as you need, Isaac continued. Once you're stronger, we can talk about what comes next. What comes next? The words echoed hollowly in Primrose's mind. What could possibly come next when everything she had ever known was gone? Thank you, she managed, because her mother had raised her to be polite, even in the face of unbearable loss. Isaac nodded once, his expression grave. Get some rest, Miss Gibson, Mrs. Porter will bring you some broth when you're ready. After he left, Primrose turned her face to the wall and wept silently, mourning the family she feared she would never see again. The next week passed in a haze of grief and slow recovery. Primrose's body healed faster than her heart, the scratches and bruises fading while the ache of loss remained constant. Mrs. Porter provided her with clean dresses that had belonged to Isaac's sister, who had married and moved to California some years before. They were a bit too large for Primrose's slender frame, but with a few quick alterations, they served well enough. As her strength returned, Primrose insisted on making herself useful. She helped Mrs. Porter with household tasks, cooking, cleaning, mending, partly out of gratitude and partly to keep her hands and mind occupied. The work was a blessed distraction from the grief that threatened to consume her in idle moments. Isaac Grayson was often absent from the main house, managing his sizable cattle operation with the help of a foreman named Oliver Daniels and a half-dozen ranch hands. When their paths did cross, Isaac was unfailingly polite but maintained a certain reserve. It was clear he was a man accustomed to responsibility, carrying it in the set of his broad shoulders and the thoughtful furrow of his brow. On the 10th day of her stay, Primrose ventured to the barn, drawn by the rhythmic sound of hooves and the occasional whinny. She found Isaac there, brushing down his chestnut stallion, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms. Miss Gibson, he greeted her, pausing in his work. Should you be up and about? I can't stay in that room forever, Primrose replied. And please call me Primrose. After all you've done for me, formality seems unnecessary. A slight smile curved his mouth. Primrose then, and I'm Isaac, not Mr. Grayson, at least not to friends. Friends, the word caught her off guard. Were they friends? This man was still largely a stranger to her, yet he had saved her life, offered her shelter, and searched tirelessly for her family. I wanted to thank you properly, she said, stepping closer to run her hand along the horse's sleek neck. For everything. Isaac resumed brushing, his strokes long and even. No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same. No, Primrose disagreed quietly. Not everyone would have. He glanced at her, those storm-gray eyes assessing. You've had experiences that suggest otherwise. It wasn't a question, but Primrose found herself answering anyway. My father always said that hardship reveals character. Some rise to help their neighbors, others don't. She swallowed hard, thinking of her father's unwavering belief in doing right by others, even when it cost him. He would have appreciated what you've done for me. Isaac was silent for a moment, focusing on a tangle in the horse's mane. Your father sounds like a good man. He was, Primrose said, the past tense bitter on her tongue. They all were good people. They deserved better then. She couldn't finish the sentence. Death rarely concerns itself with what people deserve, Isaac said, his voice low. Something in his tone made Primrose look at him more closely. You speak from experience. Isaac's hands stilled. My parents died in a Comanche raid when I was 15. My sister Eliza was 12. We were in town when it happened, staying with friends while our parents drove cattle to Fort Bowie. He resumed brushing, though his movements were less fluid. By the time we returned, there was nothing left but ashes and bodies. I'm sorry, Primrose whispered, understanding now why he had been so determined to help her search for her family. He knew what it was to need answers, even terrible ones. It was a long time ago, Isaac said, though the shadows in his eyes suggested the wound had never fully healed. My uncle took us in, taught me ranching. When he passed, he left everything to me. Eliza met her husband when he came through with a cattle drive, and now they've got 2 little ones in San Francisco. Primrose thought of her own brother who would never grow up, never have a family of his own. Fresh grief washed over her. Isaac seemed to sense the direction of her thoughts. Sheriff Matthews sent word yesterday, he said. They found a boy's body near Williams Crossing, about 20 miles downstream. Hope and dread collided in Primrose's chest. Was it? The description didn't match your brother, Isaac said gently. Too old, different coloring, but they're still searching. Primrose nodded, unsure whether to feel relief or despair that the waiting continued. I need to go back, she said suddenly, to what's left of our homestead. There might be something I missed, something that survived the flood. Isaac considered her request, then nodded. I'll take you tomorrow if you feel strong enough, but Primrose. His expression grew serious. You should prepare yourself for what you might find or not find. I know, she said softly, but I need to try. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the storm that had changed Primrose's life forever. Isaac helped her mount a gentle mare named Daisy, then swung up onto his own stallion, Thunder. They rode in companionable silence, the steady rhythm of hooves against earth the only sound for long stretches. As they neared the site of her family's homestead, Primrose's heart began to race. Would she recognize anything? Would there be any trace of the life they had built? They crested a small rise, and Primrose drew in a sharp breath. The land below was still scarred by the flood's fury, though new green shoots were beginning to emerge from the mud. Of her family's cabin, almost nothing remained, just the stone foundation and chimney standing like tombstones in the desolation. Wait here, Isaac said as they dismounted. Let me check that it's safe, but Primrose couldn't wait. She moved forward as if in a trance, her eyes scanning the debris field, searching for anything familiar among the scattered timber and stones. Near where the front door had once stood, something caught her eye, a glint of metal half buried in the mud. She knelt, ignoring the dampness seeping through her skirts, and carefully dug with her fingers. What emerged was her mother's silver music box, dented and mudded but miraculously intact. With trembling hands, Primrose opened it. The delicate mechanism inside was damaged, but when she gently turned the key, it gave a halting rendition of the lullaby her mother had played for her and Thomas since they were babies. The music broke something inside her. Primrose clutched the box to her chest and sobbed, her grief finding voice at last in deep, wrenching cries that tore from her throat. She was vaguely aware of Isaac kneeling beside her, his arm coming around her shoulders, solid and steady as she shattered. "They're really gone," she choked out between sobs. "They're never coming back, I know," Isaac murmured, his voice rough with empathy. "I know." For a long time they stayed like that, Primrose weeping while Isaac held her, offering the silent comfort of his presence. When her tears finally subsided, leaving her drained but somehow lighter, she pulled away slightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered, embarrassed by her breakdown. "Don't be," Isaac said firmly. "Grief demands its due. Better to let it out than to let it fester inside you." Primrose looked up at him, seeing not pity in his eyes but understanding. This man knew what it was to lose everything, to have to rebuild from ashes. There was strength in him, but not the unyielding kind that broke under pressure, rather, the flexible strength of a willow that bent with the wind but did not break. "Thank you," she said simply. Isaac nodded, then rose to his feet, offering her his hand. "Let's see what else we can salvage." They spent hours combing through the ruins. In addition to the music box, they found a few of her mother's cooking utensils, her father's damaged but repairable toolbox, and a small trunk containing family mementos letters, a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day, a lock of Thomas's baby hair tied with blue ribbon. Each item was a treasure to Primrose, tangible proof that her family had existed, that they had lived and loved in this place. By the time they loaded everything onto the horses, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. "We should head back," Isaac said, glancing at the sky. "It'll be dark soon." As they rode away, Primrose looked back one last time at the place that had been her home. "Goodbye," she whispered, not just to the land but to the life she had known there. Isaac heard her soft farewell. "It's not forever," he said. "You can come back whenever you want. Build again if that's what you choose to do." Primrose considered his words. Could she rebuild here alone? The thought was overwhelming. "I don't know what I'll do," she admitted. "Everything I planned for my future included them." "You don't have to decide right away," Isaac assured her. "You have time." Time. It stretched before Primrose like an uncharted wilderness. Time to grieve, time to heal, time to somehow find a new path without the guideposts of family to direct her. They rode back to the ranch in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, Mrs. Porter took one look at Primrose's face and wordlessly enveloped her in a maternal hug that nearly undid all her hard-won composure. "I've drawn you a bath," the housekeeper said, leading Primrose inside, "and there's fresh stew for supper when you're ready." That night, after bathing away the dust and mud of the homestead, Primrose sat at the kitchen table with Isaac and Mrs. Porter. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of beef stew and fresh bread. Despite her grief, Primrose found her appetite returning, her body demanding sustenance even as her heart still ached. "I need to think about what comes next," she said, breaking a long, comfortable silence. "I can't impose on your hospitality forever." "You're not imposing," Isaac said immediately. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need." "That's very generous, but—" Primrose hesitated. "I need to support myself. I have some skills I can cook, so teach reading and figures. Perhaps there's work in Silver Creek." Mrs. Porter and Isaac exchanged a glance that Primrose couldn't interpret. "Actually," Mrs. Porter said, "I've been thinking about that. I'm not getting any younger, and this house is a lot for one person to manage. I could use help, especially with Mr. Grayson expanding the herd and hosting more business associates." "Are you offering me a position?" Primrose asked, surprised. "If you're interested," Mrs. Porter confirmed. "Room and board plus wages, nothing extravagant, mind you, but fair." Primrose looked to Isaac, who nodded. "It's a good suggestion. Mrs. Porter has been threatening to retire for years." "I have not," the older woman huffed, though there was no real annoyance in her tone. "I simply mentioned that these old bones aren't what they used to be." Primrose considered the offer. Working here would provide her with security while she figured out her longer-term future. And despite the circumstances of her arrival, she had grown comfortable at the ranch with its orderly routines and the quiet strength of its owner. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I accept, at least for now." "Excellent," Mrs. Porter beamed. "We'll start tomorrow with the linens. They're in desperate need of attention." Isaac smiled slightly. "I'll leave you ladies to work out the details," he said, rising from the table. "I have accounts to review before turning in." After he left, Mrs. Porter began clearing the dishes. Primrose rose to help her. "He's a good man, Mrs. Porter said casually, handing Primrose a plate to dry. "Works too hard, though, never takes time for himself." "He's been very kind to me," Primrose agreed, carefully drying the china. "Kind, yes, but there's more to him than that," Mrs. Porter continued. "He's built this ranch into one of the most successful operations in the territory, and he did it honestly, unlike some I could name. Treats his men fair, pays them on time. Even the Apaches respect him. He's negotiated water rights with them when other ranchers just took what they wanted." Primrose listened, intrigued by this insight into the man who had saved her. "He mentioned losing his parents young." Mrs. Porter nodded sadly. "Terrible business, that was. He and his sister came through it, but it changed him, made him more careful with his heart." She gave Primrose a significant look. "Not that it's any of my business, of course." "Of course," Primrose echoed, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks, though she wasn't entirely sure why. That night, lying in bed with her mother's music box on the nightstand beside her, Primrose thought about the strange turn her life had taken. 2 weeks ago, she had been a daughter and a sister, with a clear understanding of her place in the world. Now she was alone, adrift, clinging to the kindness of strangers who were rapidly becoming friends, and Isaac Grayson. Primrose wasn't blind to his appeal. Any woman would notice his handsome features, his quiet strength, the integrity that seemed to radiate from him. But her heart was too raw, too broken to contemplate anything beyond friendship. And surely he saw her as nothing more than a charitable obligation, a young woman in need of assistance. With these thoughts swirling in her mind, Primrose drifted into sleep, dreaming of floodwaters and reaching hands and a pair of storm-gray eyes watching over her. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Primrose worked alongside Mrs. Porter, learning the running of the large ranch house, everything from managing the pantry to organizing the laundry to planning meals for the ranch hands. The physical labor was a blessing, leaving her too tired at day's end to do more than fall into dreamless sleep. Isaac was often away from the main house, riding the range with his men, checking on the cattle, meeting with buyers in Silver Creek. But he took supper at the house most evenings, and Primrose gradually became accustomed to his quiet presence at the head of the table. He was not a man of many words, but when he did speak, his observations were thoughtful and often laced with dry humor that surprised a laugh from her even on her darkest days. As spring deepened into summer, Primrose's grief began to soften at the edges. She still missed her family with an ache that sometimes took her breath away, but increasingly there were moments when she could remember them with fondness rather than paralyzing sorrow. The music box became a comfort rather than a torment, its halting melody a connection to her mother rather than a reminder of loss. One evening in late June, after Mrs. Porter had retired for the night, Primrose found herself alone on the porch with Isaac. The air was warm, fragrant with the scent of Mrs. Porter's climbing roses. Fireflies danced in the gathering darkness, their brief flashes like fallen stars. "Sheriff Matthews sent word," Isaac said, breaking a comfortable silence. "They've called off the search for your family." Primrose had expected this news, but it still hurt to hear it spoken aloud. "I know," she said softly. "It's been almost 3 months. If they were going to find anything—" "I'm sorry," Isaac said, and she knew he meant it. "Thank you." Primrose gazed out at the fireflies. "Not just for the search, but for everything. I don't know what would have happened to me if you hadn't found me that day." Isaac shifted in his chair, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "You'd have managed. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." "Maybe," Primrose allowed. "But I'm glad I didn't have to find out." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. "Do you ever get over it, losing your family like that?" Isaac was quiet for so long that Primrose thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "You don't get over it, you learn to live with it. The pain becomes part of you like a scar, it fades with time, but it's always there." "That's what I'm afraid of," Primrose admitted. "That I'll always be defined by this loss." "You won't," Isaac said with surprising certainty. It will shape you, yes, but it won't define you, not unless you let it. Primrose turned to look at him, struck by the conviction in his voice. In the dim light from the parlor windows, his profile was strong and sure, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains as if he could see something there that eluded her. "How do you know?" she asked. Isaac met her eyes then, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. "Because I see you, Primrose Gibson. I see how you've begun to rebuild day by day, how you care for this house and the people in it, how you've started to laugh again." A small smile touched his lips. "You're more than your grief." His words touched something deep inside her, a place that had been cold and numb since the flood. Warmth spread through her chest, unfamiliar yet welcome. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to articulate the complex emotions his words had stirred. Isaac nodded, then rose from his chair. "It's getting late. We both have an early start tomorrow." As he moved to the door, Primrose felt a sudden reluctance to end the moment. "Isaac," he paused, looking back at her, "would you?" She hesitated, then pushed forward. "Would you tell me about your parents sometime, what they were like?" Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps, and a hint of vulnerability she had never seen before. "I'd like that," he said quietly, "and I'd like to hear about yours too when you're ready." "I'd like that too," Primrose echoed. After he went inside, Primrose remained on the porch for a long time, watching the fireflies and considering the man who had saved her in more ways than one. July brought scorching heat and the annual Silver Creek Independence Day celebration. Isaac surprised Primrose by inviting her to accompany him and Mrs. Porter to the festivities. She accepted eagerly, longing for a change of scenery and a chance to experience something normal, something that reminded her that life continued despite loss. The small town was transformed for the occasion, with bunting draped from buildings and tables set up in the square for a communal feast. There was to be music and dancing in the evening, followed by a modest display of fireworks that the town council had arranged at considerable expense. Primrose wore her best dress, a robin's egg blue cotton that Mrs. Porter had helped her alter from one of Isaac Grayson's gowns. Her copper hair was arranged in a simple but elegant knot, and she had even dabbed a tiny amount of rosewater behind her ears, a small luxury that Mrs. Porter had insisted upon. When she descended the stairs, Isaac was waiting in the foyer, dressed in a clean black suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His dark hair was neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. He looked up as she approached, and the admiration in his eyes sent a flutter of nerves through her stomach. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Primrose felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Thank you, you clean up quite well yourself, Mr. Grayson." A smile tugged at his mouth. "I thought we were past such formalities, Miss Gibson." "Only when you're covered in dust from the range," she teased, surprising herself with her boldness. Isaac laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Fair enough, shall we? Mrs. Porter is already in the wagon." The ride to town was pleasant, with Mrs. Porter chattering about previous celebrations and who they might see there. Primrose half listened, her attention divided between the passing landscape and the solid presence of Isaac beside her on the wagon seat. Silver Creek was bustling when they arrived, the townsfolk out in their finest clothes. Isaac helped both women down from the wagon, his hand lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary on Primrose's waist. "Isaac, good to see you, man." A tall, distinguished gentleman approached, clapping Isaac on the shoulder. "Judge Wallace," Isaac greeted him. "May I present Mrs. Abigail Porter, my housekeeper, and Miss Primrose Gibson, her assistant." "Ladies, this is Judge Edward Wallace, who keeps law and order in these parts when Sheriff Matthews is otherwise occupied." The judge tipped his hat to the ladies. "Charmed, I'm sure. Miss Gibson, I don't believe I've had the pleasure before." "Miss Gibson is new to the area," Isaac explained smoothly, offering no further details. Understanding flickered in the judge's eyes. "Ah, yes, I heard about the tragedy. My condolences, my dear." "Thank you, Judge," Primrose said softly. "Well, you're in good hands with the Grayson outfit," Judge Wallace continued. "Isaac here is one of our most respected citizens. Wouldn't surprise me if he runs for territorial legislature one of these days." Isaac shook his head. "I leave politics to men like you, Judge. I'm content with my cattle." The conversation continued for a few minutes before they moved on, greeting other townsfolk as they made their way to the food tables. Primrose was introduced to so many people that their names began to blur together, though everyone was welcoming. After eating their fill of the potluck offerings, they found seats for the speeches. The mayor, a portly man with an impressive mustache, droned on about progress and civilization, while Judge Wallace followed with a more engaging talk about the meaning of independence. As the afternoon waned, musicians began to set up on a wooden platform. Lanterns were lit as twilight approached, casting a golden glow over the square. "Would you care to dance?" Isaac asked when the music began, a lively reel that had couples already forming lines. Primrose hesitated. She hadn't danced since before the flood, and the thought of such ordinary joy felt almost traitorous to her grief. Isaac seemed to read her thoughts. "It's all right to enjoy yourself, Primrose. Your family would want that for you." His gentle understanding loosened the knot in her chest. "Yes," she said, taking his offered hand. "I would like to dance." Isaac led her to the floor with unexpected grace for such a tall man. The dance brought them together and apart, their hands touching and releasing in the patterns of the reel. Primrose found herself smiling, then laughing as Isaac executed a particularly elaborate turn. They danced 3 more sets before taking a break for lemonade. Primrose's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with exertion and pleasure. "You dance well for a cattleman," she observed, sipping her drink. "My mother insisted," Isaac replied. "She said no son of hers would clod around a dance floor like a bear with a sore paw." Primrose laughed at the image. "She sounds wonderful." "She was," Isaac said, his expression softening with memory. "Strong-willed but kind. My father adored her. They used to dance in the kitchen sometimes when they thought we were asleep." The simple picture he painted of domestic happiness touched Primrose deeply. "My parents were like that too," she said. "So in love, even after years together, I always hope to find that kind of partnership someday." Something flickered in Isaac's eyes, but before he could respond, a commotion broke out near the sheriff's office. Raised voices carried across the square, followed by the unmistakable sound of a fist connecting with flesh. "Stay here," Isaac instructed, setting down his lemonade and moving toward the disturbance. Primrose, of course, did no such thing. She followed at a discreet distance, curious about what had disrupted the peaceful celebration. A small crowd had gathered around 2 men, one on the ground, bleeding from his nose, the other standing over him with clenched fists. Sheriff Matthews was pushing through the onlookers, his hand on his holstered pistol. "That's enough, Blackwood," the sheriff called. "Back away from him now." The standing man, Blackwood, spat on the ground near his opponent. "This cheating bastard owes me $50. I didn't cheat." The bloodied man protested, climbing unsteadily to his feet. "You're just a poor loser, Blackwood." Blackwood lunged forward again, but Isaac stepped between them, his back to the injured man as he faced down the aggressor. "That's enough," Isaac said, his voice low but carrying. "The celebration is no place for this." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "Stay out of this, Grayson. It ain't your business." "I'm making it my business," Isaac replied evenly. "Go cool off, Blackwood. Whatever grievance you have can wait for tomorrow." For a tense moment, Primrose thought Blackwood might strike Isaac, but something in Isaac's steady gaze, or perhaps the arrival of the sheriff and his deputy, made the man reconsider. "Fine," Blackwood growled, stepping back. "But this ain't over, Patterson." He glared at his opponent, then at Isaac, before stalking away toward the saloon. The crowd began to disperse as Sheriff Matthews helped the injured man Patterson to his feet. "Thanks for the assist, Grayson," the sheriff said. "Blackwood's been nothing but trouble since he rode into town last month. Claims to be buying land for a ranch, but mostly he just drinks and plays cards. Keep an eye on him," Isaac advised. "Men like that usually bring more trouble than just a fistfight." The sheriff nodded grimly. "Already am." "Now don't let this spoil your evening. The fireworks will be starting soon." As Isaac turned to leave, he spotted Primrose and frowned slightly. "I thought I asked you to stay put." "You did," she agreed, "but I was curious." A reluctant smile tugged at his mouth. "Curiosity can be dangerous." "So can stepping between 2 angry men," Primrose countered. "That was brave of you." Isaac shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. It was foolish of Blackwood to cause trouble with the whole town watching. Men like him mistake cruelty for strength. They rejoined Mrs. Porter, who had witnessed the altercation from a safe distance. Trouble seems to follow that Blackwood character, she observed. I've heard he's been making inquiries about surrounding properties, including yours, Isaac. Isaac's expression darkened. The rocking G isn't for sale at any price. Of course not, Mrs. Porter soothed. I'm just passing along what I heard at the Mercantile last week. The conversation was interrupted by the first whistling boom of the fireworks. Everyone turned their attention skyward as brilliant bursts of color illuminated the night. Despite the earlier tension, the mood of the crowd was festive again, with oohs and ahs accompanying each spectacular display. Standing beside Isaac in the darkness, watching the sky bloom with light, Primrose felt a strange sense of contentment steal over her. For the first time since the flood, she felt truly present, not lost in grief or moving through her days by rote. When Isaac's hand found hers in the darkness, she didn't pull away. His palm was warm against hers, his fingers entwining with her own in a gentle but definite clasp. Primrose's heart stuttered, then raced, but she kept her eyes on the fireworks, not trusting herself to look at him just then. They stood like that until the final explosion faded from the sky, connected by that simple touch that somehow felt more intimate than the dance they had shared earlier. When Isaac finally released her hand as the crowd began to disperse, Primrose felt the absence of his touch like a physical thing. The ride home was quiet, all three of them tired from the long day. Mrs. Porter dozed in the back of the wagon, while Primrose and Isaac sat side by side on the seat, not touching but acutely aware of each other. The stars overhead were brilliant, the moon a silver crescent casting just enough light to see the road. "Thank you for today," Primrose said softly, breaking the companionable silence. "I needed it more than I realized." Isaac glanced at her, his profile strong in the moonlight. "I'm glad you enjoyed yourself. You deserve some happiness, Primrose." The simple statement touched her deeply. "So do you," she replied, his hands tightened imperceptibly on the reins. "I have a good life, the ranch, good people working for me." "But," Primrose prompted, sensing there was more he wasn't saying. Isaac was quiet for a moment. "But sometimes I wonder if there should be more to life than work and responsibility." The vulnerability in his admission made Primrose's heart ache. This strong, capable man who carried so many burdens for others rarely seemed to think of his own happiness. "There should be," she said softly. They fell silent again, but it was a different silence now, filled with unspoken possibilities that neither was quite ready to voice. When they reached the ranch, Isaac helped Mrs. Porter down first, then turned to assist Primrose. His hands at her waist were steady and sure as he lifted her down, but he didn't immediately step away. For a breathless moment, they stood close enough that Primrose could feel the warmth radiating from him, could see the question in his eyes. "Primrose," he began, his voice low. "Isaac." "Miss Gibson, come quickly." Mrs. Porter's urgent call shattered the moment. They turned to see the housekeeper pointing toward the barn where an ominous orange glow was visible through the windows. "Fire!" Isaac shouted, already running toward the structure. "Wake the bunkhouse." He called over his shoulder to Primrose. "Get all the men." Primrose hitched up her skirts and ran toward the bunkhouse, her heart pounding with fear. By the time she reached it, some of the ranch hands were already emerging, alerted by the commotion. "Fire in the barn," she cried. "Mr. Grayson needs everyone." The men sprang into action, grabbing buckets and rushing toward the well. Primrose followed, joining a bucket line that formed between the well and the barn. Inside, she could hear the panicked whinnies of the horses as Isaac and Oliver worked to free them from their stalls. The night air filled with smoke and shouts as everyone fought the blaze. Primrose passed bucket after bucket, her arms aching, her lungs burning from the smoke. But gradually their efforts began to tell. The flames receded, and finally, after what seemed like hours, Oliver emerged from the barn, his face blackened with soot. "It's out," he announced, coughing. "Got it before it took the whole structure." A cheer went up from the exhausted ranch hands. Primrose sagged with relief, only then realizing how terrified she had been, not for the barn itself, but for Isaac, who had rushed into danger without hesitation. As if summoned by her thoughts, Isaac appeared, leading a trembling colt. His shirt was torn and singed, his face streaked with soot, but he was whole and unharmed. Their eyes met across the yard, and something passed between them: relief, understanding, a silent acknowledgement of fear conquered. "Everyone all right?" Isaac called, handing the colt to one of the hands. A chorus of affirmatives answered him. All the horses had been saved, and while the barn had suffered damage, it was largely intact. "Good work, all of you," Isaac said. "Oliver, post a watch for the rest of the night in case any embers flare up. Everyone else get some rest. We'll assess the damage properly in daylight." As the men dispersed, Isaac approached Primrose, who was still standing by the now empty bucket line. "You should go inside," he said gently. "You must be exhausted." "So must you," she replied, unable to tear her gaze from the smudge of soot across his cheekbone, the way his damp shirt clung to his shoulders. "I need to check the horses first, make sure none were injured in the panic." Impulsively, Primrose reached up and brushed a bit of ash from his jaw. "Let me help. I'm not helpless, Isaac." He caught her hand in his expression softening. "I know you're not. That's what worries me." Before she could ask what he meant, Mrs. Porter called from the house, breaking the moment. "There's hot coffee and food for anyone who wants it." They joined the others in the kitchen, where Mrs. Porter had laid out bread, cold meat, and coffee. The mood was subdued but relieved as they ate and discussed the fire. "It wasn't an accident," Oliver said grimly, accepting a mug of coffee from Mrs. Porter. "Someone set it deliberate-like." "I found the remains of a torch near the hay storage." A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. "Blackwood," Isaac said, his voice flat. Oliver nodded. "That'd be my guess. He was mighty sore after you stepped in at the celebration." "But to set fire to a barn full of animals," Primrose protested. "That's beyond retaliation, it's criminal." "Some men don't see it that way," Isaac said, his expression grim. "To Blackwood, it's just business. He wants this land, and he's sending a message that he's willing to play rough to get it." "Will you go to the sheriff?" Mrs. Porter asked. Isaac sighed. "In the morning, but without proof, there's little Matthews can do. So we just wait for Blackwood to try again." Primrose couldn't keep the indignation from her voice. "No," Isaac said, his tone hardening. "We prepare. Double the night watch, check the fences daily, keep the horses closer to the house." He looked around the table at his men. "And everyone stays alert. No one rides alone, no matter how short the distance." The gravity of his words settled over the room. This was more than a simple disagreement or a drunken act of vandalism. This was the beginning of something darker, a challenge to everything Isaac had built. As the meeting broke up and the ranch hands returned to the bunkhouse, Primrose lingered in the kitchen, helping Mrs. Porter clean up. "This Blackwood," she said quietly, "is he truly dangerous?" Mrs. Porter's normally cheerful face was somber. "Men like that, men who would burn animals alive to make a point they're capable of anything, my dear." Primrose shivered despite the warm night. "I've brought more trouble to your door." "If I hadn't been with Isaac tonight." "Nonsense," Mrs. Porter said firmly. "This has nothing to do with you. Blackwood has been sniffing around the Rocking G since before you arrived. He represents Eastern investors who want to expand into cattle, and they don't much care how they acquire the land. Still, I feel responsible. Isaac stepped in because of me." Mrs. Porter patted her hand. "Isaac stepped in because he's a good man who doesn't abide bullies. That's who he is, with or without you beside him." She gave Primrose a shrewd look. "Though I dare say he's been happier with you here than I've seen him in years." Primrose felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mrs. Porter, oh, don't mind me," the older woman said with a knowing smile. "I'm just an old woman who notices things, like the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching, or the way you light up when he enters a room." "It's not we're not," Primrose stammered, flustered by the housekeeper's directness. "Not yet, perhaps," Mrs. Porter allowed. "But life is short and often cruel, my dear. When happiness presents itself, only a fool turns away." With that enigmatic statement, she wiped her hands on her apron. "Now, we should both get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a busy day." Primrose lay awake long into the night, her mind too full for sleep. She thought of Isaac running into the burning barn without hesitation, of his hand holding hers beneath the fireworks, of the unspoken question in his eyes before they were interrupted. She thought of Mrs. Porter's words about seizing happiness when it presented itself. And for the first time since the flood, Primrose allowed herself to imagine a future not just surviving day to day, but truly living again with purpose and perhaps even love. The morning brought Sheriff Matthews to the rocking G, his expression grim as he surveyed the damage to the barn. "This is serious business, Isaac," he said as they stood in the charred doorway. "Arson is a hanging offense in this territory, if you can prove who did it," Isaac pointed out. The sheriff sighed. "That's the rub, isn't it? No one saw Blackwood here, and I'd wager he made sure he was visible in town after you left the celebration. So he goes unpunished." "For now," Sheriff Matthews agreed, "but men like Blackwood get careless eventually. When he does, we'll be waiting." He clapped Isaac on the shoulder. "In the meantime, watch your back, and maybe consider selling a piece of your northern range to take the pressure off." Isaac's jaw tightened. "This land isn't for sale, not 1 acre. The sheriff shook his head. "Your father was just as stubborn." "I hope it doesn't cost you what it cost him." After the sheriff departed, Isaac threw himself into repairing the barn, working alongside his men from dawn till dusk. Primrose brought water and food to the workers, concerned by the grim determination in Isaac's face, the way he pushed himself beyond reasonable limits. On the third day of repairs, she found him alone in the barn after the other men had gone to supper. He was replacing damaged boards, his movements mechanical, his expression remote. "You missed supper," Primrose said, setting down the plate she had brought for him. Isaac barely glanced up. "I'm not hungry. You need to eat." "What I need," he said, driving a nail with more force than necessary, "is to finish these repairs before Blackwood decides to try again." Primrose stepped closer, undeterred by his brusque tone. "You also need rest. You've barely slept since the fire. I've gone without sleep before." "Isaac." Primrose laid her hand on his arm, stilling his movements. "This isn't just about the barn, is it? What did the sheriff mean about your father?" Isaac's shoulders slumped slightly. He set down his hammer and turned to face her. "My father died defending this land," he said quietly. "Not from Comanches, as most people believe. He was shot by men working for the Southern Pacific Railroad when he refused to sell his water rights." Primrose's hand flew to her mouth. "But you said—" "I said my parents died in a raid. It's the story my uncle put about to protect me and Eliza. The men who killed my father were never brought to justice, and my uncle feared they would come for us if they thought we knew the truth." "That's why you won't sell," Primrose realized. "Not even a small parcel." Isaac nodded, his expression haunted. "My father built this ranch from nothing. He worked himself to the bone for it, believed in it when no one else did. I won't dishonor his memory by giving away what he died to protect." Primrose's heart ached for him, for the burden he had carried all these years. "I understand," she said softly. "But your father wouldn't want you to work yourself to death either. He would want you to live, Isaac, really live." Their eyes met, and in that moment something shifted between them. The air seemed charged, electric with possibility. "Primrose," Isaac said, his voice rough. A shout from outside interrupted whatever he had been about to say. They both turned toward the door as Oliver burst in, his expression urgent. "Riders coming," he announced. 6 of them, armed, Blackwood's with them. Isaac's face hardened. "Get the men." "Rifles, but keep them lowered unless I give the word. I won't start a war, but I'll damn well finish one if I have to." As Oliver hurried away, Isaac turned to Primrose. "Go to the house. Stay with Mrs. Porter." "No," Primrose said firmly. "I won't hide while you face danger." "This isn't open for discussion," Isaac insisted. "These are dangerous men, Primrose." "All the more reason you need everyone you can trust at your back," she countered. "I can handle a rifle if it comes to that." Isaac looked as if he wanted to argue further, but the sound of approaching hooves cut him short. "Stay behind me," he conceded. "And if shooting starts, you get to cover immediately. Understand?" Primrose nodded, her heart pounding as they moved to the front of the house where Oliver and the other hands were already assembling. The riders approached slowly, deliberately, their intentions clear in the way they spread out in a loose semicircle before the house. Blackwood rode at their center, a tall man with a shock of white blonde hair and cold eyes. He reined in his horse about 20 yards from where Isaac stood. "Grayson," he called. "We need to talk." "We've got nothing to discuss, Blackwood," Isaac replied evenly. You're trespassing on private property. Turn around and ride out. Blackwood's thin lips curved in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Now, is that any way to treat visitors, especially when I've come with such a generous offer? He pulled a folded document from his coat. $5,000 for the Rocking G. That's more than fair for a spread this size with all the problems it's been having lately. The Rocking G isn't for sale, Isaac said flatly. Not to you, not to anyone. Everyone has a price, Grayson, Blackwood drawled. I'm just trying to find yours before things get unpleasant, like burning my barn. Isaac's voice was dangerously quiet. That kind of unpleasant. Blackwood spread his hands in mock innocence. Now, why would I do something like that? Accidents happen all the time out here in the wilderness. Barns burn, cattle stampede, men get shot. The threat was unmistakable. Primrose felt cold fear spread through her veins, but Isaac stood unmoved, his posture relaxed but alert. Let me be clear, Blackwood, he said. This land isn't for sale at any price, not 5,000, not 50,000. And if you or your men set foot on my property again without invitation, you won't leave under your own power. He nodded toward Oliver and the ranch hands, all of whom had rifles at the ready. I've got 15 men who'll back that promise. Blackwood's face darkened. You're making a mistake, Grayson. The only mistake was thinking you could intimidate me, Isaac replied. Now get off my land. For a tense moment, it seemed Blackwood might order his men to attack. Primrose held her breath, her hand finding the small derringer in her pocket that misses. Porter had pressed on her before she left the house. Then, abruptly, Blackwood laughed. You've got spine, I'll give you that. He tucked the document back into his coat. But this isn't over, Grayson, not by a long shot. He wheeled his horse around. Come on, boys. Mr. Grayson needs time to reconsider his position. As they rode away, Primrose released the breath she had been holding. Isaac turned to his men. Double the night watch, he ordered, and send riders to check the herd. I wouldn't put it past Blackwood to have men driving off cattle while he kept us occupied here. The hands dispersed to their tasks, leaving Isaac and Primrose alone before the house. You handled that well, Primrose said, impressed by his calm in the face of such blatant threats. Isaac's expression was grim. This is just the beginning. Blackwood won't give up easily. Neither will you, Primrose pointed out, and you have people who believe in you who will stand with you. Isaac looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing something new in her face. Including you, especially me, Primrose said softly. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, then warmth, then a deeper emotion that made her heart beat faster. He took a step toward her, then another, until they were standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Primrose, he said, his voice low and intense. I need to say something that I should have said weeks ago. Yes, she whispered, hardly daring to breathe. When I found you by the creek that day, I thought I was just doing what anyone would do, helping someone in need, but it was more than that. He took her hand in his touch gentle yet sure. You've brought something to my life that I didn't even know was missing. Light, warmth, purpose beyond just work and duty. Primrose's heart hammered against her ribs. Isaac, I know it's too soon, he continued quickly. You're still grieving and there's this business with Blackwood to resolve, but I need you to know how I feel. I care for you, Primrose, more than I thought possible. Tears welled in Primrose's eyes, but they were not tears of grief. It's not too soon, she whispered, squeezing his hand. Life is too short and too precious to waste a moment of happiness when it presents itself. Isaac's eyes widened slightly, a smile tugging at his mouth. That sounds suspiciously like something Mrs. Porter would say. She's a wise woman, Primrose acknowledged with a watery laugh. And she's right. I care for you too, Isaac, so much that it frightens me sometimes. Why does it frighten you? He asked, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. Because I've lost everyone I've ever loved, Primrose admitted. The thought of loving again, of risking that kind of pain. I can't promise you that we won't face hardship, Isaac said seriously. Life out here is unpredictable and often harsh, but I can promise that you won't face it alone, not ever again if I have anything to say about it. His words, so simple and yet so profound, broke through the last of Primrose's defenses. The wall she had built around her heart since the flood crumbled, allowing hope to bloom in its place. When Isaac bent his head and kissed her, It felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. His lips were warm and gentle against hers, the kiss a question and an answer all at once. Primrose's hands found their way to his shoulders, steadying herself as she rose on tiptoe to deepen the kiss. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the fireworks," he confessed. Primrose smiled, joy bubbling up inside her despite the danger that still threatened. "I've wanted you to do that since the fireworks, too." Isaac laughed, the sound rich and full, before sobering slightly. "We still have Blackwood to deal with. It won't be easy or safe." "Nothing worth having ever is," Primrose said, surprising herself with her certainty. "We'll face it together." And in that moment, with the setting sun painting the ranch in gold and the man she loved looking at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, Primrose knew that she had found not just shelter, but a future she could never have imagined on that terrible night when the flood took everything she had known. The following weeks were a study in contrasts, the growing sweetness of her relationship with Isaac set against the increasing tension of Blackwood's campaign against the Rocking G. Small acts of sabotage plagued the ranch: cut fences, a poisoned water hole, cattle driven off in the night. Each incident was too small to prove Blackwood's involvement, but significant enough to strain resources and nerves. Through it all, Isaac remained resolute, working tirelessly to protect what was his while also finding time to court Primrose properly. Their evenings together became a refuge from the day's troubles, whether they were reading aloud by the fire, taking walks under the stars, or simply talking late into the night about their hopes and dreams. In early August, Isaac surprised her with a trip to Silver Creek, ostensibly to purchase supplies but really, as he admitted with a boyish grin, to show her off as his girl. They had lunch at the hotel dining room, drawing curious but mostly approving glances from the townsfolk. "People are staring," Primrose observed, smoothing the skirt of her green calico dress, the nicest one she owned. "Let them," Isaac said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I want everyone to know that you're with me." The simple declaration warmed her more than the summer sun streaming through the windows. "I am with you," she affirmed. "In all things." After lunch, they visited the Mercantile, where Isaac insisted on buying her a bottle of real French perfume despite her protests that it was too extravagant. As they left the store, packages in hand, a familiar voice called out, "Well, if it isn't the stubborn rancher and his pretty little housemaid." Blackwood leaned against a hitching post across the street, a cigarette dangling from his lips. Two of his men lounged nearby, their postures deceptively casual. Isaac's hand tightened on Primrose's arm. "Keep walking," he murmured. "Don't engage him." But Blackwood was not so easily ignored. He pushed away from the hitching post and sauntered across the street toward them. "No greeting for an old friend, Grayson. That's not very neighborly." "We're not friends, Blackwood," Isaac said coldly, "and we're not neighbors." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes, not yet, but circumstances change. His gaze shifted to Primrose, trailing over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Miss Gibson, isn't it? A tragic story, yours, losing your family in the flood, all alone in the world." The casual mention of her family's fate felt like a violation. "Not alone," Primrose said, lifting her chin. "And my tragedy is none of your concern." "Oh, but it is," Blackwood countered. "Everything in this territory is my concern, especially when it affects business." He turned back to Isaac. "My offer still stands, Grayson. $5,000, it's more than fair." "The answer is still no," Isaac said flatly. Blackwood sighed dramatically. "You know, my employers are growing impatient. They sent me here to acquire certain properties, and I've delivered on all but yours." His voice hardened. "I don't like disappointing my employers." "Your problems aren't mine," Isaac replied. "Now, if you'll excuse us." As they moved to step around him, Blackwood reached out suddenly, grabbing Primrose's arm. "Perhaps I should make a different offer," he said, his voice low and menacing. "One that concerns the lovely Miss Gibson here." Isaac moved so quickly that Primrose barely registered what happened. One moment Blackwood was gripping her arm, the next he was flat on his back in the dusty street, blood streaming from his nose where Isaac's fist had connected. "Don't ever touch her again," Isaac said, his voice deadly quiet. Don't speak to her, don't even look in her direction. If you do, what happened to your nose will seem like a kindness. Blackwood wiped the blood from his face, his eyes murderous. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life, Grayson. No, Isaac countered. That would be you the day you decided to target my ranch. He turned to Primrose, his expression softening as he checked her arm where Blackwood had grabbed her. Are you all right? I'm fine, she assured him, though her heart was racing from the confrontation. Isaac nodded, then guided her toward their wagon, keeping himself between her and Blackwood. As they drove away, Primrose could feel Blackwood's hate-filled gaze boring into their backs. That was foolish, she said once they were out of earshot, though there was no real reproach in her tone. Maybe, Isaac acknowledged, but I won't stand by while he threatens you. He was already dangerous, Primrose pointed out. Now he'll be out for revenge as well as the ranch. Isaac's jaw tightened. Let him try, I've dealt with worse than Josiah Blackwood. They rode in silence for a while, each lost in thought. Finally, Primrose spoke. We need to end this, Isaac, not just react to each new attack, but find a way to stop Blackwood for good. I've been thinking the same thing, Isaac admitted. Sheriff Matthews is sympathetic, but without proof of Blackwood's involvement in the sabotage, his hands are tied. So we need proof, Primrose said decisively. Isaac glanced at her, a smile tugging at his mouth despite the seriousness of the situation. We. Of course we, Primrose said firmly. We're in this together, remember? Isaac's expression softened. I remember, and you're right, we need a plan. That evening, after returning to the ranch, they gathered with Oliver and Mrs. Porter in the study to discuss strategy. Oliver reported that one of Blackwood's men had been seen talking to a young hand from the neighboring Circle T ranch, possibly attempting to gather information about the rocking GTKS operations. We could use that, Isaac mused. Feed false information about a large shipment of cattle or money. Set a trap, Oliver agreed, but we'd need to make it convincing. And ensure we had witnesses when Blackwood took the bait, Primrose added, preferably the sheriff or other respected citizens. They talked late into the night, refining the plan. By the time they dispersed to their beds, they had a strategy that might finally end Blackwood's reign of terror if everything went perfectly. The next morning, Oliver rode to town to drunkenly let slip in the saloon that Isaac was expecting a large bank draft from cattle buyers in Denver, to be delivered by private courier in 3 days' time. The draft, according to the story, would be held overnight in the ranch safe before Isaac took it to the bank in Prescott, a larger town some 30 miles away. Over the next 2 days, they made visible preparations for the non-existent courier, ensuring that word would get back to Blackwood. Sheriff Matthews was informed of the real plan and agreed to be on hand with deputies when the trap was sprung. The night before the supposed courier was to arrive, Isaac found Primrose on the porch, gazing at the stars. He settled into the chair beside her, taking her hand in his. Nervous about tomorrow? He asked. A little, she admitted. But mostly I'm ready for this to be over one way or another. Isaac squeezed her hand. It will be, by this time tomorrow, Blackwood will be in jail or on his way out of the territory. Primrose turned to look at him, studying his face in the lamplight spilling from the window. And then what? What do you mean? After Blackwood, she clarified. What happens next for us? Isaac's expression grew serious. That depends on you, Primrose, on me. He shifted in his chair to face her more fully. I had planned to wait until this business with Blackwood was resolved, but perhaps now is the right time after all. He took a deep breath. I love you, Primrose Gibson. I think I've loved you since I found you by that creek, though I was too stubborn to admit it even to myself. Primrose's heart swelled with joy, tears pricking at her eyes. I love you too, she whispered. Isaac smiled, the tension leaving his shoulders at her words. Then what happens next is entirely up to you. We can take things slowly if you need more time. Or, Primrose prompted when he hesitated. Instead of answering immediately, Isaac reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Primrose's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. Or you could marry me, he said simply. Be my wife, my partner in everything. Help me build something here that will last, something good." Tears spilled down Primrose's cheeks, but they were tears of happiness. "Yes," she breathed. "Oh, Isaac, yes." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the pearl glowing softly in the lamplight. "It was my mother's," he explained. "She would have loved you." "And I would have loved her," Primrose said, admiring the ring through her tears. "For raising such a wonderful son, if nothing else." Isaac laughed softly, then leaned forward to kiss her, a kiss full of promise and future and hope. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Tomorrow we deal with Blackwood," he murmured, "and then we start our life together without shadows hanging over us." "I can't think of anything I want more," Primrose replied, her heart so full it felt it might burst. They sat together on the porch until the night grew cool, talking of plans and dreams, the future spreading before them like an unwritten story waiting to be told. The next day dawned clear and hot, the August sun beating down on the ranch with merciless intensity. By mid-morning, everything was in place for their trap. Isaac had positioned men at strategic points around the property, and Sheriff Matthews and his deputy were concealed in the barn, ready to move when Blackwood showed himself. Primrose helped Mrs. Porter prepare a large midday meal, keeping up the pretense that they were expecting an important visitor. Though outwardly calm, she couldn't help the flutter of anxiety in her stomach. So much could go wrong with their plan. Just after noon, a rider approached the ranch, not the fictitious courier, but a young boy from town, his horse lathered from hard riding. "Mr. Grayson," he called as Isaac met him in the yard. "Sheriff Matthews sent me." Blackwood and his men left town at dawn, heading north. Isaac's expression darkened. "North, are you certain?" "Yes, sir. The sheriff followed their trail for a few miles to be sure. They're not coming here." Primrose joined Isaac in the yard, concern etching her features. "Why would they go north? There's nothing in that direction except—" "The North Range," Isaac finished grimly. "Where we moved the herd after the water hole was poisoned." He turned to Oliver, who had hurried over upon seeing the messenger. "Get the men mounted. Blackwood's not after any bank draft, he's after the cattle." As the ranch hands scrambled to prepare for the ride, Sheriff Matthews emerged from the barn, his expression grave. Clever diversion on his part. He must have suspected a trap, or decided that stealing cattle was easier than robbing a courier, Isaac said. "Either way, we need to move fast. If he drives that herd across the territorial line, we'll never recover them." "I'm coming with you," the sheriff declared. "This is the evidence we need to put Blackwood away for good." Isaac nodded, then turned to Primrose. "Stay here with Mrs. Porter. Keep the house secured." "We shouldn't be gone more than a day." Primrose wanted to protest, to insist on coming along, but she recognized the wisdom in his request. Someone needed to remain at the ranch, and she could handle a rifle if trouble came. "Be careful," she said, reaching up to touch his face. "Come back to me." Isaac caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Always," he promised. "Keep my ring safe until I return." With that, he mounted Thunder and led the men out, riding hard toward the North Range where the bulk of the herd had been grazing. Primrose watched until they disappeared from sight, then turned resolutely toward the house. There was work to be done, preparations to make in case the men returned with injuries, or in case Blackwood had set yet another trap. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Primrose and Mrs. Porter kept busy, but their ears were constantly attuned to any sound from outside. As dusk approached, Primrose's anxiety grew. Isaac had said they would be gone a day at most, but she had hoped for word before nightfall. "They'll be fine, Mrs. Porter assured her, though the older woman's eyes betrayed her own concern. "Isaac knows what he's doing." "I know," Primrose said, twisting her engagement ring nervously, "but Blackwood is desperate now. Desperate men are dangerous." They had just lit the lamps when the sound of hooves brought them both to the window. Primrose's heart leapt, then plummeted as she recognized not Isaac or any of the rocking G hands, but three of Blackwood's men, including the man himself. They must have split up, Primrose realized aloud. Sent some men after the cattle as a diversion while they came here where there would be fewer defenders. Mrs. Porter's face paled. "The guns are in the study. I'll get them." As the older woman hurried away, Primrose peered through the window again. Blackwood and his men had dismounted and were approaching the house, their postures suggesting they expected no resistance. Mrs. Porter returned with 2 rifles and Primrose's small derringer. "What do we do?" she whispered. Primrose considered their options. They were outnumbered, but they had the advantage of being inside a sturdy house. "We hold them off," she decided. "Keep them talking until Isaac and the others return. They'll realize it's a trap soon enough." A heavy knock sounded at the door. "Grayson," Blackwood called, "open up." "We have business to discuss." Primrose positioned herself near the window, rifle ready but out of sight. "Mr. Grayson isn't here," she called back. "Whatever business you have can wait until tomorrow." There was a pause, then Blackwood's voice again, this time with a note of triumph. "Miss Gibson, how convenient. Perhaps we can discuss my business with you instead." "I have no business with you, Mr. Blackwood," Primrose replied steadily. "Please leave the property at once." A harsh laugh was his only response, followed by the sound of boots on the porch steps. "I'm afraid I can't do that," Blackwood said. "You see, Grayson has something that belongs to me, and I intend to take it one way or another." "Nothing here belongs to you," Primrose countered, signaling to Mrs. Porter to position herself at the back door in case they tried to enter that way. "That's where you're wrong," Blackwood said. "This entire valley belongs to my employers. Grayson is just an inconvenience, one that I'm going to remove permanently." The threat in his words was unmistakable. Primrose tightened her grip on the rifle. "The sheriff knows you're here," she lied. "He and his men are on their way." "A nice try," Blackwood drawled. "But we both know Matthews is chasing my men and a few dozen cattle halfway to the territorial line by now." There was a sharp crack as something likely the butt of a gun struck the door. "Open up, Miss Gibson, or we'll break it down, and then things will get very unpleasant for you and the old woman." Primrose's mind raced. They needed to buy time, but how? An idea struck her, desperate but potentially effective. "Wait," she called. "There's something you should know before you do anything foolish." The pounding paused. "I'm listening." "Isaac anticipated this," Primrose said, injecting confidence into her voice. "He left most of the men here hidden. They're surrounding the house right now, waiting for my signal." There was a moment of silence, then a bark of laughter. "A bluff, and not a very good one. We watched the ranch all morning. Grayson took every man with him." "Not every man," came a new voice, Oliver's. Primrose's heart leapt with hope. The foreman must have stayed behind or returned early. "Drop your weapons, Blackwood. You're covered from 3 sides." Peering carefully around the curtain, Primrose could see Blackwood and his men looking around uncertainly. Oliver stood at the corner of the house, his rifle aimed steadily at Blackwood's chest. "You expect me to believe one man stayed behind," Blackwood scoffed, though he seemed less certain now. "Not one," Oliver replied calmly. 6, the rest are just better at staying hidden than I am." It was a magnificent bluff. Primrose held her breath, praying that Blackwood would believe it. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Blackwood slowly raised his hands. "Seems we've reached an impasse," he said. "Perhaps we should all take a step back and reconsider our positions." "The only position you need to consider is face down in the dirt," Oliver said flatly. "Now drop your guns." "All of you?" Blackwood's men looked to him for direction, clearly uneasy with the situation. Finally, Blackwood nodded slightly, and they all carefully placed their weapons on the ground. "Kick them away," Oliver instructed. "Then kneel, hands behind your heads." They complied, though Blackwood's face was a mask of barely contained rage. Oliver moved forward cautiously, keeping his rifle trained on them. "Miss Gibson," he called, "would you be so kind as to fetch some rope from the barn? We need to secure our guests until the sheriff returns." Primrose hesitated, reluctant to leave Mrs. Porter alone even with Oliver there. "I'll stay with the rifle on them," she called back. "Mrs. Porter can get the rope." Oliver nodded his understanding, and Mrs. Porter slipped out the back door toward the barn. Primrose moved to the front door, opening it just enough to aim her rifle through the gap. "A clever trap," Blackwood said, his eyes cold as they fixed on Primrose. "But it won't matter in the end. My employers won't stop with one failed attempt." "Your employers will disavow any knowledge of your actions once you're arrested for attempted robbery and cattle rustling," Primrose replied. "Men like them don't reward failure." Something flickered in Blackwood's eyes, fear, perhaps, or recognition of the truth in her words. Before he could respond, Mrs. Porter returned with several lengths of rope. Under Oliver's direction, they bound the three men securely, then moved them to the barn where they could be more easily guarded. Only when they were safely locked in an empty stall did Primrose allow herself to feel the delayed reaction to the danger. Her hands trembled, and her knees felt weak with relief. "That was quick thinking," Oliver commended her. "Both of you." "I'm just glad you returned when you did," Primrose said. "Were you alone? Where are Isaac and the others?" Oliver's expression sobered. "Still pursuing the rest of Blackwood's men and the stolen cattle. I came back to warn you that Blackwood had split his forces." "Arrived just in time from the look of it. Will they be all right?" Primrose couldn't keep the worry from her voice. "Isaac can handle himself," Oliver assured her, "and he has the sheriff and 10 good men with him. They'll be back by morning, I'd wager." Primrose nodded, though anxiety still gnawed at her. The confrontation with Blackwood had ended better than she could have hoped, but until Isaac returned safely, she wouldn't be able to truly relax. As if reading her thoughts, Oliver added gently, "He'll come back to you, Miss Gibson. A man with someone to come home to always finds his way." The night passed slowly, with Oliver keeping watch over their prisoners while Primrose and Mrs. Porter took turns resting. Despite her exhaustion, Primrose found sleep elusive, her mind too full of worry for Isaac and the others. Dawn was just breaking when the sound of multiple riders approaching brought Primrose hurrying onto the porch. Her heart soared as she recognized Isaac at the head of the group, dirty and weary-looking but blessedly whole. She ran to meet him as he dismounted, flinging herself into his arms with little regard for propriety. Isaac held her tightly, his face buried in her hair. "Thank God," he murmured. "When we realized Blackwood had split his men, I was afraid." "We're fine," Primrose assured him, pulling back to look at his face. "Oliver returned in time and we captured Blackwood and 2 of his men." Isaac's eyes widened with surprise, then filled with pride. "You never cease to amaze me, Primrose Gibson." Sheriff Matthews approached, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. "We recovered most of the cattle and captured 3 of Blackwood's men. With what you've got here, that's enough to put them all away for a very long time." The next hours were a flurry of activity as statements were taken, prisoners secured for transport to the territorial prison, and the weary men fed and tended to. By midday, the sheriff had departed with Blackwood and his men, and a semblance of normalcy began to return to the rocking G. Isaac found Primrose in the garden, where she had retreated for a moment of quiet after the morning's chaos. He sat beside her on the bench beneath the old oak tree, taking her hand in his. "It's over," he said simply. "Really over." Primrose leaned against his shoulder, the events of the past day catching up with her now that the danger had passed. "I kept thinking about what would happen if you didn't come back," she admitted. "About being alone again." Isaac's arm tightened around her. "I'll always come back to you," he promised. "Always." They sat in companionable silence for a while, drawing strength from each other's presence. Finally, Isaac spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "I was thinking while we were riding back about what happens next, about our future." "Oh." Primrose looked up at him, curious. "I don't want to wait," he said simply. "Life is too unpredictable, too precious to waste a single day. If you're willing, I'd like to marry you as soon as possible." Joy bloomed in Primrose's heart. "How soon is as soon as possible?" Isaac smiled, that rare full smile that transformed his serious face. "Well, the circuit preacher comes through Silver Creek next Sunday. That gives us a week to prepare if that's not too rushed for you." Primrose pretended to consider, though her mind was already made up. "A week seems like an eternity to wait," she teased, "but I suppose I can be patient if I must." Isaac laughed, pulling her closer. "Have I told you today how much I love you? You might have mentioned it," Primrose replied, smiling up at him, "but I don't mind hearing it again." "I love you, Primrose Gibson," he said, his voice deep with emotion, "more than I have words to express." "And I love you, Isaac Grayson," she whispered back, "with all that I am and all that I have." When he kissed her then, beneath the spreading branches of the oak tree, Primrose felt as if her life had come full circle. The flood had taken everything from her, but it had also, in its terrible way, brought her here, to this man and this place that had become more home to her than any she had known before. The wedding was a simple affair, held in the small church in Silver Creek with the entire town in attendance. Primrose wore a dress of ivory satin that Mrs. Porter had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had once belonged to Isaac's mother. Her copper hair was adorned with wildflowers, and she carried a bouquet of late summer blooms from the ranch garden. Judge Wallace gave her away, a role he accepted with solemn dignity when Primrose asked him. Oliver stood as Isaac's best man, his weathered face beaming with genuine happiness for his boss and friend. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Isaac kissed her before the assembled witnesses, Primrose felt a sense of rightness so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This was where she belonged, with this man, in this life they would build together. The celebration afterward was joyous, with music and dancing and enough food to feed twice the number of guests. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the festivities, Isaac led Primrose away from the crowd for a moment of privacy. "Happy, Mrs. Grayson?" he asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled down at her. "More than I ever thought possible," Primrose answered truthfully. "It feels almost wrong to be this happy after everything that's happened." Isaac's expression grew serious. "Your family would want this for you," he said gently. "They would want you to live, to love, to build a future. That doesn't dishonor their memory, it honors it." Primrose nodded, tears threatening again. "I know, and I like to think they're watching somehow, that they know I'm safe and loved." She touched the locket at her throat, which contained a small piece of the ribbon from Thomas's lock of hair and a tiny scrap of her mother's shawl. "I'll always carry them with me." "As will I," Isaac promised. "They're part of you and you're part of me now." As they rejoined the celebration, Primrose looked around at the faces of those who had become her new family, Mrs. Porter, who had taken her under her wing. Oliver and the ranch hands, who had accepted her without question, the townsfolk of Silver Creek, who had welcomed her into their community. And at the center of it all, Isaac, whose love had given her a second chance at happiness. The flood had swept away her family and the life she had known. But from that tragedy had come this new beginning, this chance to build something lasting and good with the man who had found her alone and given her not just shelter, but a home and a heart to call her own. 5 years later, Primrose stood on the porch of the Rocking G Ranch house, watching as Isaac taught their 4-year-old son, Thomas, to ride his new pony. The little boy's delighted laughter carried across the yard as Isaac led the pony in a circle, his large hand steady on Thomas's back. Beside Primrose, 2-year-old Elizabeth toddled on sturdy legs, clutching her mother's skirts as she watched her brother with wide-eyed fascination. "Me ride," she declared, pointing imperiously at the pony. "When you're a bit older, sweetheart," Primrose promised, smoothing her daughter's dark curls, so like Isaac's in color if not in texture. The ranch had prospered in the years since their marriage. With Blackwood and his employers defeated, the Rocking G had expanded, adding adjacent lands when they became available and improving the stock through careful breeding. The main house had been enlarged to accommodate their growing family, though they had preserved the original rooms where Primrose had first found healing and hope. Mrs. Porter still presided over the household, though she now had 2 young maids to help with the heavier work. She doted on the children as if they were her own grandchildren, slipping them treats and telling them stories of the old days. As Isaac helped Thomas dismount and led the pony back to the small paddock, Primrose's heart swelled with love for her family. There were still days when grief for what she had lost caught her unawares: her parents' anniversary, Thomas's birthday, the date of the flood, but those moments were balanced by the joy of the life she had built with Isaac. "Mama, did you see?" Thomas called, running toward her with his father following at a more measured pace. "I rode all by myself, I saw," Primrose assured him, bending to accept his enthusiastic hug. "You were very brave." "Like Papa," the boy declared, looking back at Isaac with adoration. "Just like Papa," Primrose agreed, meeting her husband's eyes over their son's head. The love she saw there, steady and sure as it had been from the beginning, still had the power to take her breath away. That night, after the children were asleep, Primrose and Isaac sat on the porch as had become their custom, watching the stars emerge in the velvety darkness of the Arizona sky. "I had a letter from Eliza today," Isaac said, breaking a comfortable silence. "She and James are thinking of moving back to the territory. The children are older now, and she misses the open spaces." "That would be wonderful," Primrose said sincerely. Though she had only met Isaac's sister once, when Eliza had traveled from California for their wedding, they had developed a warm correspondence over the years. The children would love having cousins nearby. Isaac nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I was thinking we might offer them the old Patterson place. It's good land and close enough that we could see them regularly." "A perfect solution," Primrose agreed. "Families should be together when possible." Isaac took her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm in a gesture that had become familiar but never lost its power to move her. "You've given me that, a family, something I thought I'd lost forever when my parents died." "We gave it to each other," Primrose corrected softly. "When you found me by that creek, I thought my life was over, but it was just beginning." Isaac drew her into his arms, and as they sat together beneath the star-strewn sky, Primrose thought of all the twists and turns of fate that had brought her here, the terrible flood that had taken her first family, the chance discovery by a man with the heart and courage to help a stranger, the love that had grown between them against all odds. Life in the West was unpredictable, sometimes harsh, but also filled with beauty and possibility. With Isaac beside her and their children sleeping safely inside, Primrose faced the future with a grateful heart and the certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together just as they had from that first desperate day when the flood swept away her family and the cowboy found her alone and gave her shelter.